people really like it though. Yeah, they feel like it's intimate or what have you. So, yeah, we're encased or enclosed by, but then yeah, others of us. Yeah, it would be nice if we had a space, but it wasn't open up top. I would have to say. Yeah, all the sound goes right up. So for soft-spoken people like myself, it's like, oops, they have to really speak up. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, the sound does travel. It's true. That's right. All right, well, it is that time. So, good afternoon. It does sound like or feel like nobody can hear it. Can you all hear us okay? It's all right. Good afternoon. My name is Alicia Yokoyama, and I'd like to welcome you to our first Adult Summer Library Challenge event. The Lake Oswego Public Library's Adult Summer Library Challenge, sponsored by the Friends of the Lake Oswego Public Library, is a program designed to encourage adults to read more by rewarding them with prizes. Just for signing up, you'll receive a tote with even more rewards inside, and you'll be entered into a weekly drawing for a $25 gift card to a local bookstore, as well as our end of summer grand prize gift baskets. So if you haven't already, sign up at lopl.org/read squared. Also, you receive extra points toward those drawings by attending Adult Summer Library Challenge events like this one. To claim the badge for today's program in your Read Squared account, the code word is, get ready, community. A couple more housekeeping items. We have an assistive listening system, so if you're having trouble hearing me, you can use it to better hear during events on this floor. These devices are available for today's program and are located on the table next to the librarian's desk back there. And if you wouldn't mind filling out a survey at the end of today's program, we'd appreciate it. Now, without further ado, I am very pleased to introduce Nicolette Hume, our colleague from the Adult Community Center, who graciously agreed to come speak with us today about the impact of social connections and curiosity on longevity and life quality. With over 13 years of experience serving the Lake Oswego community, Nicolette Hume has dedicated her career to fostering connections among adults, promoting wellness, and encouraging lifelong learning. Her rewarding career began at Providence Health Services, transitioning to a pivotal role at the City of Lake Oswego Adult Community Center for the past 8 years. As a modern Native American woman from a rural background, Nicolette values sharing diverse perspectives and life experiences. She is passionate about building bridges with participants, exchanging insights, and discovering common ground. Her work with older adults has reinforced her belief that curiosity is key to longevity and personal growth. She remains committed to helping individuals access resources that promote independence and fulfillment. Please welcome Nicolette Hume.
Welcome. Can all of you hear me okay? Okay. I was telling our IT person earlier, this is the time of year where my hearing gets not very good because the music and the windows are down and all of that. But yes, welcome. We're going to talk about the secret to longevity, and it's really not what you think. And when I was first invited here, they thought about maybe doing brain games, or we hear a lot about that in New York Times or other publications. But what we're finding within the more gerontology world is that some of that is not as effective as we think. And so I'll be sharing some of what I've seen throughout my career and some anecdotal stories as well to kind of share with you how that, key factor isn't all just about the mind, that really we're more holistic as we think we are. So as was shared with you in the beginning, I'll just kind of introduce briefly who I am and kind of give some pictures here. And also to kind of give you a frame or a lens as to how I have come to this city and where my starting place was, because it's drastically different. I grew up in the rural area of northern Nevada. I was nowhere near Reno and absolutely nowhere near Las Vegas. We had wild Mustangs that were in our front yard, which were remnants of the Old West, and very much a part of my tribal community, the Western Shoshone Tomoke tribe in northern Nevada, that ranges from Winnemucca all the way to Elko, if you are familiar with that area. But coming from a very rural, part of the world, part of the country, where, the old ways are still encompassed in part of, somewhat modern society. But elders are always really important, and that storytelling and hearing the different generations talk about their struggles. I actually knew my great grandmother. She lived to be about 115. That was on one side, and my other great grandmother lived to be roughly the same age on the other side of my native family. They were still very much practicing traditional ways of eating and such. And then obviously as time has gone on, things have definitely changed. But these grandmothers of mine also remembered what it was like before what we would call the roundup, when we were sent to stay in these different reservation sites. So they understood following of the herd. So it was a really interesting perspective. But then also growing up in that environment, I also knew the other side. So when people would tell me, like, oh, it must be so great to be a part of like the powwow culture, and ask me all of these, things that we see in the movies and things like that, I'd be like, I don't know what you're talking about. That has not been my experience. I will say that I have seen the other side of the tracks, so to speak. The part where when you go to sometimes these casinos and whatnot, there's another part that is kind of hidden away. And I also want to say not every tribe has a casino, because I was in Nevada. There were casinos at the grocery store. So we did not have something like that. We would be considered, kind of more of a poor tribal community as opposed to Grand Ronde. They're kind of an outlier. But aside from that, growing up with that lens, coming here to the other end of the socioeconomic spectrum was quite drastic. I was one of the only people to have ever graduated from college in my tribal community. And so my way of kind of going back to serve was to be a social worker. But if any of you know anyone, when you're living in one world and you have your foot in the other, it can be really hard to navigate where you really belong. And so I was there for a time of my life working as a social worker. But what's really odd is when you're working with your relatives. It can be a very interesting component. But what I did see outside of there is I also worked for a variety of different social agencies like Social Security, from that to the Indian Health Service. I even worked for the EPA for a period of time back in Washington, D.C. So I've kind of had I've been all over the country and could sing I've Been Everywhere Man or Woman. But aside from that, one thing that I've always loved, as teachers really love working with children, I love working with anyone over 50. Like, that is my favorite group of people to work with. And I think a lot of it is because of the experience and the wisdom. But one of the things that I've noticed in my work is that a lot of individuals who are programmers like myself really can be pretty ageist. What we deem as appropriate for someone over a certain age, whether that's physically or mentally, emotionally, whatever we deem as appropriate that they would be interested in my experience, has been the complete opposite. I have found out so many interesting life stories and even different ways of handling certain situations or ailments by the elders within this community that really blew my mind. Even before certain things were legal, were being practiced kind of in these small communities within our community. And I thought, you know what? I think we're getting it wrong here. They're just as curious about things as I am. And that even though there may be a gap in age, we're really not that different as adults. So this kind of shows a little bit of that. And I did work for Providence here in town. And while I was working there, I noticed that we had a lot of older adults that would come in and just hang out and not work in the fitness facility. So I started finding ways to partner here at the community center using my social work skills, and then eventually kind of got hired on and was working 2 places at once. But again, in doing that, what I found was that there was this desire to learn, that as we get older, we really want to learn. And what I also saw too was that it wasn't just topics regarding like academic type things. They were wanting to know about marijuana as medicine. And I found out a lot of them were already doing that. And this is as dispensaries were just starting to come into play. Or the fact that there is a real thing called the gray divorce, and people are out there looking for a mate and or companionship, and that there was a real desire for that. And so I would bring in these speakers to just talk, just to make these what we see as taboo really aren't taboo. It's just more adult-natured conversation. It's not like we're not talking about these things with our close friends. And I found that it was bringing out a lot of individuals, but the other part was it was bringing out a lot of men. And it's really hard for men to come on their own to certain programs. They're usually brought here by somebody, some woman in their life, but they were coming alone. And so the Living Well Talk series, I started that back in 2018. And it was just really to reach out to this group within Lake Oswego, this group of older adults. And the word kind of spread. We'd have people coming in from Gresham by bus, which, oh my goodness, that was the biggest compliment I ever received, because that's a long journey. But with that, the National Council on Aging back in DC awarded that program with its highest achievement award. And I really, really have taken that to great heart and just continue to be in pursuit of it. I find that a lot of people in certain jobs, they can kind of be a little bit afraid to kind of put themselves out there. But when we dare, you never know what may be on the other end. And so I'm always trying to push it a little bit more. But this is a picture here. I kind of made this collage of my family. So this is my mother, and that is me as a baby. That was considered our baby Bjorn. This is a deerskin cradle board, as we called it, that my mom would carry me around in on a regular basis. And my great-great-grandmother, she was a medicine woman within our tribal community, and she made that for me. And then here's my family, my husband, my 2 boys. This is my great-grandmother, who is still living. Again, all these women have lived independently, again, into their hundreds, totally independent. And then this is my great-great-grandmother, the one that I was speaking of, and my great-grandmother. And again, I knew them very well. So it's just really interesting because you see that and you're like, that is an old picture. And it's like, yeah, and I knew them. So it's just crazy. Another thing too here is there's a picture of myself with some photography that I do, that I have done on my reservation. This is a picture of wild horses that kind of embarrassed my oldest son, who's in college now, but I sang to him down from a canyon, and there they were, and they let me take that picture, so that's one of my most favorite ones. But moving on, talking about longevity. So it really isn't just about living longer. It really isn't, because like when I said, when I worked for Providence, I would see people come in who like devoted their life to fitness. They were a prevention magazine walking. They did everything right. I think some of these individuals would have had to work really hard to gain weight, but it was really important for them. And they would a lot of times come in and be like, I have this crazy cancer diagnosis that has come out of nowhere, but I've been doing all the things. And then I'd have individuals who would come in who were, built a little bit more stocky, or maybe they've developed some issues related to chronic weight issues over the years, and they're like, I'm here because my doctor sent me, and whatever. And they were doing okay, you know, and a lot of times they outlived the other ones, and it was like, what is going on here? What does all of this mean? Like, if you do all these things, we're supposed to live longer, but we're not really seeing, I'm not seeing that happen in front of me. I'm seeing kind of the opposite. And what I realized is that maybe it's just about doing those things that we should be doing really just creates a better quality of life while we're here. But in terms of how long we last, that really, no one really knows. But at the same time, the other factor too is the connections aspect. We love being independent within our culture. We just love it. And we're finding that when it comes to people living in these retirement communities, a lot of boomers, a lot of the younger boomers are saying, I'm not doing that. That's what my parents did, or someone else, but I'm not doing that. I'm going to live independently as long as I possibly can. And that's a really great thing. I completely respect that type of autonomy. But it can also be really isolating, especially if you're alone and don't have children or a spouse or any type of mate. And even when we struggle in that way, who's going to come out and say, you know what, I'm really lonely. I'd like to seek some friends, maybe take out an ad, but that's not realistic. The other part, too, is that power of inquiry. We are very curious people, or we can be, I should say. And I see two routes that tend to happen. There's people who just kind of, I have my routine. This is what I do. I watch my shows. I eat this and do that. And then I go to bed, and it's literally Groundhog's Day over and over again. And then there's this other camp who, it's like, you know what? I've always been curious about this one thing, and maybe they are more isolated, but there's this sense of pursuit. They're pursuing knowledge about something, and it makes it fun for them. And maybe they're doing it on their own, but they can also begin to expand their community if they really start allowing themselves to. So it's really about putting yourself outside of that box. And then also as well is looking for local resources like the Lake Oswego Adult Community Center. We are a nationally award-winning center in the United States. There are many centers who do not have the ability to put forth certain programs that we do, to allow certain partnerships that we have. One of the things that I do within my programming when I am trying to create these programs, in my headline, or my subject line, I could put what the topic is about and people would be like, delete, or they're not interested. But I say, City of Lake Oswego request. And I will tell you, that response will get their attention every time. And I do not take that for granted, because not only is there a response, I always figure at least they've looked at it and they'll say yes. Or the fact that we have had some wonderful donors and community members who have been able to support some of these programs, or we've been able to find resources to support these programs. Because it doesn't just benefit our community, it also goes beyond there. Like I said, I had that woman coming all the way from Gresham, because there are outlying communities that do not have the types of resources that we do. But I also say it also adds to the diversity as well. And it expands our community and our minds. So I'm just so fortunate for that. I mean, really, Lake Oswego has been so good to me on so many levels. So when it comes to the role of socialization, it is a fundamental need. We have to have that. And if we don't, there's even studies back, I don't know if any of you are familiar in, I always think of The Gangs of New York Time, that movie from Leonardo DiCaprio, but when there were all these children just on the streets. And what they were finding, there was a researcher, Bowlby is his name. He also created the whole attachment theory and how people attach. But these children were not being touched. We need that. We crave that. And I don't know how many times, even at the community center, that I'll just, give someone a hug just because I see them all the time. And the response that I get has always been it's been kind of bittersweet when I hug and they say, oh, it just feels so good to be touched, to be hugged, and how that is so important. And also that reducing of stress and enhancing that health. We're finding that, what we're doing in isolation or being isolated has just as much of an effect. This is from Harvard, as if we were to be smoking. Like, I think it was up to 15 cigarettes a day. So it's that harmful to our health to not have any type of social connection whatsoever. And then also that 50% higher survival rate. It makes you feel like you have something worth living for. The United Kingdom right now, and they've been talking about this even pre-pandemic with their older population, really the boomers and older, that the loneliness factor is really quite really within the realms of a pandemic. And that people aren't just dying from the regular diseases that we hear about. One of the new ways of dying that is becoming, front and center is failure to thrive. Isn't that just devastating to hear? There's even babies in the NICU. There was a time I used to work as a social worker in a NICU, and babies would die from that. It's that inability to have that continuous contact that we just desperately need. But as we're older, it doesn't mean we need to be snuggling with someone all the time, but we definitely need that face contact. And since the pandemic, I have certainly seen that at our center is if I can get a speaker in person, I will take that over any type of Zoom situation. And I understand that some people are not able to do that. But if we can, it's just so vital. And I also think, too, this energy exchange, if you will, between people. It's just like if you were to close your eyes in a room and someone were to walk in and you don't hear them, but you can feel something. And I really sense that there is something that goes on between every person, whether it's good or bad. Just like when we see someone, we're like, I don't know, I don't like that person, or there's something about them that I like. You just feel something from people. Also, to that, improving the mental health and happiness. I mean, my goodness, when you are, again, doing something or learning about something in a community or just bouncing off ideas or sometimes just sharing your thoughts. One thing that I'll say is, can I get a witness? Can I get a witness to what I'm feeling? Can you tell me I'm, crazy, or no, I totally see what you're seeing. It's just that validation that just makes us feel like we belong, that we're not alone, and that we all crave that. And then also, too, that contributing to longevity, that blue zone. Did you know that Lake Oswego, the city, had one time looked at really pursuing that, because we have so many components here in regards to what a blue zone is. It's where people are living longer, living full lives at a much longer rate than most other areas. So there is some financial aspects to it, but I will say we are a blue zone without paying in the green zone. So that's what I have to say about that. And here, last year in our back garden at the Adult Community Center, I don't know if any of you have been there, but I highly recommend going. I consider it to be the best kept secret in Lake Oswego. But not only that, you do not have to have any type of membership. It's open to anyone, absolutely anyone. There was a time where it was like that, but we do not do that anymore. So please definitely come. But back here, we were doing just a luncheon. I really try to create situations where people can come together and just have an experience together, because when we do, then we have something to go off in terms of friendship or connection. And so that's what was happening right here. In fact, someone brought their daughter because she heard all about it, and that's just kind of that ripple effect tends to happen. Going back to the mental and physical benefits of that community connection, I will say that we have had people with some of our programs, even our fitness programs, we do evidence-based ones, but where people may be struggling with a new diagnosis of, let's say, Parkinson's, and a spouse comes in and says, I used to have a really hard time, with this person shuffling along their spouse, and they're like, now I can't keep up with them. There's some kind of rigor that has come back to their person. Or even in our program for individuals who have mild to moderate dementia, we aren't a daycare facility for adults, but we have a social program. And they're able to come together and just have their own friendship network. They may not remember each other's names, but there is this knowing of, I know you, like there's something familiar here. And we see, relationships thrive in that way. And it's just so impactful. Also as well, the mental resilience, again, that witnessing of each other, that cognitive functioning aspect. We see that as we challenge ourselves, as we challenge our narratives, our point of views, in talking with other people and dialoguing and understanding other people's background. And the only way we can really do that is in community. It doesn't matter whether it's down the street at the community center here or some other, group or program you belong to. But the biggest thing I've seen, first and foremost, is that power of curiosity. When people, again, going back to like what we see out there in terms of, if you do these brain games, you're going to like keep your mental sharpness and, all of these things like that. Yes, but also no, because it's that curiosity piece that keeps us, again, reaching and striving and growing. And it doesn't matter if it's an academic pursuit or if it's even a spiritual one. A lot of times when we talk about wellness, that one's always like, I don't know about that. There's a lot of issues around it. Some of it can be our religious upbringing or not, but there is this part, what is a spirit? It's that fire within us that fuels us to kind of, when we feel passion for something, there's something that's igniting within us. And it's different for everybody, and we all feel it differently as well. And so that curiosity factor, that is the number one thing that I, hands down, if someone were to ask me what makes people live longer, I will say it's that. Because you cannot be just curious inside, alone, isolated. Even if you're on the internet, you are going out. It's almost like an action word is how I kind of see it, that you are in the pursuit. You can't be stagnant being curious. Some of the ways that we do that is through, that lifelong learning. You will find in our catalog there is a lot of classes in regards to that. But it does give you, when you're onto something, when you are in pursuit of the knowledge of something, you do get kind of a dopamine high. Or you may find yourself talking to yourself going, oh, well, that's interesting. Not that anybody does that, but I certainly do. Also as well, this is the part that I always found really interesting, is that it reduces the dementia risk. They are finding that more and more, that looking into things reduces that over just the doing Sudoku. I think that's how you say it. I don't know, or any other games like that. But also, when we're exploring novel things, when we're putting ourselves in situations that we're not maybe initially comfortable, it allows our brain to go, hey, wait a second. And we are exercising that muscle that we normally don't in everyday life when we have these routines. You would be surprised how many individuals eat the same thing every day, do the same thing every day, that we're very compulsive in that regards. So it's good to shake things up. But also that aspect of the being or having inactivity in our life. It is good to be physical, but there is this other part too where when we exercise that mental and emotional part of our lives, you ever have sometimes a conversation with someone and you're like, I didn't do anything but sit there, but I am exhausted. I don't know what it is, but I'm just exhausted. There is something going on there, you know. We just don't always recognize it that way. And then again, it's that sedentary behavior, you know, sitting for 10 hours related to dementia risk. But it's not just the sitting. It's you're closing yourself down. We need to open up ourselves more. So when connection meets curiosity, there's just so many amplified benefits. You know, we see that happening, like I said, in positive ways down the street. It boosts our brain. We get a natural high, a natural dopamine high, as well as oxytocin when we feel connected. When you walk into a room and they say, Norm, you know, even for in that show Cheers, there was that familiarity of feeling like, hey, I matter to someone. We're not that much different than when we were kids. I mean, really, there's just these certain elements to us that are still very much alive and well. Also, too, that looking at ourselves holistically, how are we really taking care of ourselves, especially if we are living independently? Are we just focusing on the nitty-gritty of just our physical aspect? Why not see how we're also taking care of ourselves, you know, body, mind, spirit? Really, what are we doing for ourselves? It can be so fulfilling. It doesn't matter if you are, you know, not able to walk down the street. You know, there have been people who really have some mobility challenges. But it's still, do what you can. Do what you can. Whether that's making a phone call or being connected, just do what you can. And then cognitive frailty and, again, that social and cognitive interventions, they are just so potent for combating depression. And if you notice, within the Northwest, you know, a lot of people have a vitamin D deficiency, but it's usually in the winter. And what is the winter? Hibernating time. One of the things that I do in my programming is kind of follow the seasons. And so right now in the midst of summer, we're outside. We are going on trips. We are doing things more in a community space outside. When it comes to the winter time, I tend to have more classes, more groups meeting where we're meeting around certain topics. That way we can kind of get through it together. But also in that hibernation time, that's also when we're supposed to be more introspective, you know? And then as the sun comes out in the spring and summer, we're able to kind of maybe shed some of that stuff that we've been dealing in the dark, you know? And so that's kind of how I go about doing some of my programming. And maybe it is a part of just my cultural background that I tend to look at things more cyclical or more in seasons. But I really feel as evolved as we think we are as human beings, there is just certain aspects to our human nature that we just can't outrun. And I think when we can kind of understand that and combine them, that we can come out on the other side feeling more fulfilled. And then I want to show here some pictures too. So One of the programs that I was able to start here with the library is our Senior Scholar Program. Because again, a lot of individuals within our city love to learn, and they have come from the most interesting backgrounds I have ever heard in my life. And they'll just walk into the center, and it's like, you were the producer for Barbara Walters? Oh my gosh, that's so incredible. What was really odd is I was sharing this amazing piece of information with a person who I thought was relatively close to my age, and they're like, "Who's that?" And I was like, "You don't know who Barbara Walters is? Can I talk to your parents?" But going to things like that, again, you're coming into a community. It's okay to go by yourself, because I guarantee you other people are there by themselves too. And if you're coming to a program that is of interest to you, it's like, I think I could be friends with that person over there. And then you have something to go off of. I have some pictures here. This is one of our participants, and she has always loved art, but has always had a little bit of trepidation. And so I started teaching these glass-on-glass mosaic classes. I love doing art, but I am in no way a purist to any type of way of doing any type of art. I just figure, let's just try it. But the fact that she made this masterpiece on an old window that we were able to get, we salvaged a dozen windows from Lusher Farm, the old farmhouse, and then we, layered all these stained glass remnants on it to create these beautiful creations. But the pride that she felt, I believe she's in her late 80s, of being able to do something completely out of her comfort zone, and she just had so much pride from that, and is always asking me, when's your next class? And I'm like, just hold on a second, I gotta gather materials. But again, she was not afraid to put herself out there, maybe initially, but on the other side, just that pride that you feel when you try something new. Another picture here is this individual. She was like, I see this mushroom foraging trip in the catalog. Is this a senior center? And we're like, no. Are you 18 or older? Okay, well, you can come join us on our adventures. And so she went foraging. And she went with people that were in their 30s up into their late 80s and had the best time. And look at that chanterelle. That's insanely huge. I don't even know where to begin with that. But it was, again, just trying something new with a group that you normally wouldn't interact with was just vital. And now she's hooked. That's just what happens, is they try it and they get hooked. This is another photo. Again, people that are a little bit younger but see something interesting and come away with an experience. We had a falconer come with a handful of birds from all over the world and show and talk about what they do. You could never have this intimate of an experience at the zoo, or really most places. And again, a believer in what we do after taking a chance, putting themselves out there where there might be older people. And it's like, and what's your point? They're just as interested in things as much as you know? So again, going back to your partner in healthy aging is literally a couple blocks away. You could walk there. There might even be a local, or one of our buses sometimes even does a stop here some days, and you just hop on and come on down and see what we're doing, or actually read the catalog you get in the mail. I know sometimes it seems really daunting. All the good stuff is in the back, just saying. Just like in the pantry, okay? Or at least my pantry. But really, we have everything from classes to events to different types of services that you may need, or maybe a neighbor needs. I don't know how many times we get people saying, my neighbor, they're really kind of having a hard time. I'm wondering if you could kind of tell me where to lead them. We have places and people and resources that can help you with that. And so, how the ACC is what we call it, the Adult Community Center, how it helps foster that social interaction is through our regular events. We also have community lunches that take place 3 times a week. But then we have these other special events like the falconry event, or we're going to have like a chuck wagon supper. Like, we just do a lot of, varied things. Classes and workshops. The Senior Scholar program that we just talked about, but also I kind of plan all kinds of things, whether you're into more of the scholarly things or maybe you're a little woo and you're kind of interested in that stuff. We had a recent workshop with an animal intuitive who was teaching people how to kind of tune in. And some people would say, well, that's kind of odd. And I'm like, is it? We also have classes on death and dying and all of the ins and outs of that. But again, going back to that 7 dimensions of wellness and that spiritual component, I'm like, why can't we talk about the what ifs? I mean, no one really knows, so why not, And I always really appreciate and I really value people's autonomy, because if you're coming to us on your own, that tells me that you are an adult who's able to make choices for yourself, despite what your kids say, despite what anybody says. You have your one life to live. And I want to enhance that. I want to know that it's a safe place for that. Because as individuals get older, and even with their families, if they've had families and their adult children getting older as well, it can sometimes feel like you're isolated, because you're like, I don't want them to know everything I'm doing. I don't want that judgment. But in our space, we find a lot of older adults who do have older adult children, or are just wanting to have, again, a witness to their life and what they're doing, and feeling like I'm normal for my age, for crying out loud, and feeling that autonomy. And you'll find that there. Volunteer opportunities. One thing that's really interesting about the city of Lake Oswego is we are fortunate to have a lot of people who want to help. But I got to tell you, there's not enough places. Our city is filled with well-meaning hearts, but not enough places to help. I dare anyone who has that desire to help in any subject matter to go outside the city limits, because there are definitely places and people that you will meet, that you will create those meaningful connections. And sometimes we do have openings, but I will say in the meantime, there is definitely other opportunities. And then again, that human services and support. You never know when you're going to need it. Sometimes it's just good to know what is available when the time comes. And we're usually that first resource stop and launching pad for individuals and their families. So again, practical steps again involved. This doesn't matter whether it's at our center or anywhere else. It's just putting yourself out there, like the volunteering or the clubs, talking to your neighbors. And I do understand there can be boundaries around that, because it's like, it's great to have that great dialogue with the neighbor, and then at the same time, it's like, okay, they're out there, and you want to have some distance, and I get that. But it is good to have. It's good to have that resource. And some neighborhoods are set up a little bit better for that than others. Community events, it doesn't matter if it's here or somewhere else. The fact that you and that other person and all these other people are here already shows that you have something in common. Classes and workshops, my goodness, it doesn't matter what you're into, you will find it in this city. I even saw that there was a group for, I think it was like a cuddle group, like where you get together and you just cuddle. And then people who are into art, it is endless what different resources are out there. Online connections, that one, has its pluses and minuses because, again, within a certain age range, you can be more susceptible to different types of scams or relationships online, and it doesn't have to be romantic relationships. So we do always have to be a little bit careful, but there are classes that are available online too where you can meet in community. And then scheduling some type of social time. I do find that people come to our center and they're just there. They're like, this is what I do at 9 in the morning. I come here, I get my coffee. By the way, we have a free coffee machine that makes everything from regular to lattes and, I don't know, like a macchiato or something. And it's free. It's free. Just come and be there, and surely you will meet somebody there. There's always someone hanging out down by there. And here's a group of individuals who are frequent flyers on some of our trips. What's really amazing, we had a trip going to Pendleton where they were going to go to the Pendleton Roundup and do a variety of different activities over there. And these two individuals moved out here from like the East Coast and even the South, and they'd never known each other. After that experience, they're the Bobbsey twins. They call each other sisters, and they say it with a twang, and they are just the cutest things in the world. And also, she's also another frequent flyer, and I wouldn't quite call it a part of the, what are you after a Bobbsey twins? Then it's like a triplet set. I don't know. But anyhow, again, it's that shared interest, and just they already had that to go off of, and then they found out they had all of these other life experiences that were so similar. And of course, what happens? We're bonded. We are now bonded because our stories are similar and we have similar interests. Some of our success stories, like the one that I showed you with the ladies, is one of them. Some of the trips that I try to do, again, I plan them for ones that I'm interested in. I don't get to go on them, but I get excited planning them for people. So we went out with a professional wildlife photographer, and we went birding, and Sony was able to give us their latest photography equipment, and we got to play around with it and get these amazing photos of migrant birds off of Sauvie Island. This photographer is just awesome. The Chanterelle trip here, again, multi-generational there. They had the best time and went out to a diner afterward. Have you been on a carousel in a while? We had a group go down. They were doing, I think it was an old house tour. There's in Albany, they opened up all the old houses and you could go tour them. And then afterwards they went to the carousel, and I just remember hearing people say, it was just so fun. It was like I was a little girl again. And we don't really get to have those nostalgic moments or just feel like we're literally having fun. We went on a pottery, like on a wheel pottery out in this barn. It was like a barn experience with a pottery shed, and just had a wonderful experience just being creative together. On this raft, this is on the Deschutes. This happened a couple years ago. The Deschutes is known for having some of the best rapids in the U.S. And there is a 90-something-year-old woman in the midst of that. And she said, I'm going hell or high water. And she was so proud to tell her grandkids all about it. And that's the thing, is when sometimes I'm scheduling these trips from vendors out in the community, they'll say, now, what are the ages? And I'll tell them the ages. Well, and I'm like, listen, seniors are not what it used to be. So I'm telling you, I had a 90-something-year-old woman on here going down the Deschutes River. So don't tell me it's impossible. Let people determine what is best for them. And I always use the example of my father, who walks with a cane, and he is disabled. But you cannot tell him he cannot climb that mountain. And he will boulder up that mountain, and it doesn't matter what I think. It doesn't matter what I feel comfortable with. It's completely up to him, and we should be allowed to have that no matter what age we are. Well, I don't know, maybe when kids are really young. Again, a ziplining tour, and not just any small feat. I'm talking ones that would probably make me cry for my mom. I was like, I am not doing it at all. That same 90-something-year-old woman was on there. She is so gutsy. I just completely admire that wholeheartedly. Coming together for recreation, like a concert. We do things like that here. And what was really neat about that experience is when they were playing some of these old-time songs like Red River Valley, ones that Gene Autry would sing, some of our participants within our cognitive impairment group, they were able to recall every word. It was as if this part of them that has not really been spoken to in the longest time was there. They were present in that way, and it was so remarkable to see. And we see many stories like that. And just like, again, in one of my glass classes here, that individual, she was this incredible Santa Fe artist, and moved up here to be closer to her daughter, and had a stroke that she lost a lot of that ability, but most of all, she lost the confidence. And in this, and we'd always talk about art and what we're doing and show each other how we're trying new things. And I love her because she's just so dang honest, and she'll just say, that looks awful. and I appreciate that. But when I said, just try what you can. It's about just the doing. It's about just letting it go and just seeing where it goes. Let the glass take you where it wants to go. She was so proud of herself for doing it. She goes, I hate this so much that I love it. And she meant it. She really did. And so again, these are just a snapshot of these people putting themselves out there, and they normally would not have. And a lot of individuals have been transplanted out here to be closer to family, to be closer to their kids or grandkids. And guess what happens? They've left all their friends, all of their, connections, that familiarity. Because what happens to us as we get older, our radius for living actually gets smaller and smaller. And I believe it gets to like a 5-mile radius that we tend to only operate in. Whereas right now in my life, I'm like, oh, it's in Gresham? Okay, I'll be there. I mean, not at this hour, but I'm willing to do that. Whereas the older we get, we're like, what? Milwaukee? Oh my gosh, it's so far. That's going to take all day. But really, it's good to do that. And when you have resources like ours in terms of, we have a bus, we have a driver, it's like, okay, you worry about that and I'll talk to whomever. So just knowing that that's there. And as I end it here, here's some of my contact information. I do have cards as well for any of you that are interested. But again, you just find us down the street. Just take a look at our site. We just had a class on family estrangement. I will say that I really, again, encourage you to step outside your comfort zone, your 5-mile radius, and just put yourself out there. Because a lot of times when we do that, we will always be surprised that usually there are people waiting for us on the other side. And that even in our own experiences, again, this is my own experience and the work that I do, is that a lot of things that we may have gone through or experienced in life, no matter where we live, that story has been told. It's just maybe in certain communities, rather than it being on the front lawn, like where I grew up, it may be behind perfectly manicured fence or things like that, but really we're humans everywhere we go. And we experience a lot of the same things and we share a lot of the same stories. And so again, in putting yourself out there, it does allow for us to connect in a meaningful way. Because really, ultimately, we all want a level of authenticity in our life. Good, bad, or indifferent. We just want to be real. We want to be witnessed. We want to be, understood and seen and heard. And so I encourage you to do so. And if you've never visited us, ask for me at the front desk and I'll be your friend. I'll be your plus one because we all need one. That is one thing that I do hope to have in the near future is having, rather than a speed dating event, a speed friending event. And have you pair up with people with similar interests, and hopefully you can create more of a network around shared passions and interests. Not about the romance part. I mean, hey, if that happens, but that's not the whole point. It's about just having a plus one to just enjoy life with, because we all deserve that. So I thank you again. I thank you, library, for having me, and thank you for being here.